This is An American Workplace, a podcast dedicated to rewatching and discussing NBC's beloved mockumentary series, The Office. My name is Chad Hopkins, and joining me, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Katie White. How are you tonight, Katie?
I'm great. How are you, Chad?
I'm doing well, and I'm ready to wrap up Season 1 because, I don't hate Season 1, but I know Season 2 is a lot more fun, and it's on the very nearby horizon at this point.
It is. If any of you are on the fence, stick it out. Season 2 is even better, so stick with us.
Definitely. But before we have to do that, we do have to talk about our last two episodes of Season 1. So we're starting off with Episode 5, which is titled Basketball. It aired on April 19th of 2005 and was directed and written by the showrunner, Greg Daniels. How about you tell us what happens in this episode, Katie?
So it's kind of funny, not a whole lot of actual plot in this episode. So basically, Michael organizes a pickup basketball game between the upstairs office folk and the warehouse workers, and delegates his work that day, which is creating a weekend and holiday work calendar, to Dwight. It is decided that the loser of the game will work the upcoming weekend. It's pretty much the whole plot.
Yeah, I imagine the script for this episode pretty much looked like beginning of the episode, every character plays basketball for X amount of time. End of episode, and everything
Improv
else was just
middle.
sort of improv, right? And
Yeah.
in the deleted scenes and in the commentary, they basically reveal that that's exactly what happened. They'd do like 20-minute pickup games in character, and they'd have people on standby spraying water on them for sweat purposes and all that kind of stuff. So
Not a whole lot of written lines, just have fun, play basketball.
And we'll dedicate a whole chunk just talking about the basketball game because that's where the bulk of everything funny really does happen in this episode, because when you just let these people play in characters, a whole bunch of actors gifted in improvisation, a whole lot of nonsense happens, and it's just a lot of fun.
Well, let's talk about some of these before the basketball game character interactions. What are some of yours, Chad?
Okay, well, just starting off with Michael, as we tend to do. How much do you believe that he plays basketball every weekend like he claims?
I think he probably has done it once.
Yeah, and in the deleted scenes, we more or less reveal that. He has this phone call with Packer, and he's saying, "Oh man, I wish you were going to be here." And then Packer basically reveals that Michael comes to one of their pickup games a year.
His skill level is about probably the same as mine, and I've played basketball about one time, so that sounds about right.
Yeah, and knowing what we know about Packer at this point, I kind of find it hard to believe that Packer would be any good at playing basketball either.
No.
And the funniest part about Michael bragging about being good at basketball is that he brags about how African Americans were impressed with his basketball skills. It's just this subtle racism. And it's not even all that subtle, to be honest. It's Michael just being clueless to how blatantly racist he's being. And it sort of carries throughout the episode, just these hints toward Michael thinking that black people should be good at basketball just by default.
One for me was sort of on the Pam Roy front. We see Pam on the phone with, I believe it's the maker of her toaster oven. I think that was it. It's a gift from her bridal shower or her engagement shower, one of those. And it was, 3 years ago, and her toaster oven broke and her warranty expired. And she's bummed that she can't get it replaced. But it's been so long, and she is not even married. It's just sort of another jab at her long engagement.
We learn this from Jim, who, of course, is completely disdainful of Roy and their relationship in general, because he realizes that Pam isn't all that happy in the relationship, but she's sticking it out. And just on the subject of the Roy-Pam relationship, there's this moment when Michael goes down to the warehouse with Ryan, and he's introducing everybody before the game. And Michael introduces Roy as the guy who, quote, dates Pam. And Roy doesn't correct Michael, which sort of alludes to something that sort of happens in the next episode.
And even again in the future, won't spoil it, but we do get hints later that they're kind of still just dating.
Very much so. It doesn't really resemble a traditional engagement in any sense of the word, especially in length.
Right, there's no future plans. It's just a plan to eventually get married, which isn't really an engagement in most people's books.
In this episode, we also see how Michael just continues to manipulate Dwight over and over and over again and take advantage of him because he knows that Dwight is loyal to him and Dwight wants responsibility. So to mitigate the sting of not allowing Dwight on the basketball team, he gives him this fake power to schedule everybody's weekend schedule because corporate wants people coming in on the weekends to work. And that's when I referenced this line in the last episode, and it turns out it was in the very next episode. Jim says, "This is the smallest amount of power I've ever seen go to someone's head." And it really is true. Dwight has this giant, like, how big would you say this thing is? 4x5?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Something like that. It's this huge whiteboard with a calendar on it.
It's as tall as a person.
Yeah, and Dwight has it like propped up in his lap against his desk, and he's like trying to reach across and fill this thing out with everybody. And of course, he's being most antagonistic against Jim because it's Jim. But it's just sad that Michael goes to these lengths to manipulate Dwight into getting basically what he wants rather than what Dwight wants, because he knows that Dwight will go for it.
He knows he'll do it. And honestly, when Michael said, the hand strikes and gives a flower, you can't play the basketball game, but you can do this work schedule, Dwight seems just as happy with that. I mean, he seems just fine. He's happy to take up the slack and happy to do Michael's work for him. So they're a little both to blame. I think Michael's definitely taking advantage of him.
And there are other small moments like that throughout the episode. There's another moment before the game where Michael actually references Lord of the Rings. He says something about the dwarf that follows along and is grumpy the whole time. And Dwight just names the character. He says, "Oh, that's Gimli." And Michael calls him a nerd. And it's just one of those small moments of Michael just sort of picking on Dwight and being antagonistic towards him for no reason, considering the fact that Dwight is completely loyal to Michael as a character. But we do get one funny moment that sort of stems from that, where Jim actually appears to be amused by Michael for the first time in this season. He's having a real good time laughing at that joke, calling Dwight a nerd, because it's at Dwight's expense. So I think it may not be the exact first time, but it seems like one of the first times where Jim is actually legitimately amused by Michael and not just exasperated with him.
Or just humoring him. He was actually laughing.
Right. Michael is also like completely 100% unfair to those who actually express interest in playing the game. When he first walks in for the day, he's got his gym bag. So he holds up his clothes and he's calling out to everybody else who's supposed to be playing. And so Jim holds up his gym bag and Ryan holds up a trash bag, which is funny because it makes me wonder about Ryan. Do you think him bringing his clothes in a trash bag is indicative of maybe a lack of prior sports background? Like he wouldn't already have a sports bag of some kind? Or do you think it's just him being 100% disinterested in this sports thing for Michael at all?
I hadn't given that a ton of thought, but I think it was probably just last minute. Oh man, we have this stupid basketball game today. This is the closest thing I have on hand. It's probably more of him just not caring at all about, the stupid game his boss has planned.
I think so too. And there are other moments when they're trying to decide on the starting lineup. And Michael says, "Stanley, of course." Because, again, Stanley is black, so he must be good at playing basketball. That's Michael's mindset.
Spoiler, he's not good.
No, he's not. And then we have volunteers from Phyllis, who, I feel so sad for Phyllis in this episode because he completely shuts her down. And then later when she volunteers to cheerlead after Pam denies Michael's gross request to be cheerleader for the team and says, "Yuck, that'd be even worse than you playing." It's so sad, so sad. And then Oscar volunteers and he says, "No, we'll use you in the future when we maybe play baseball or boxing," because there's another stereotype for Michael. Check off the list. And then Kevin, who is he's
really good.
He's really good, as we find out.
He's probably the best one, yeah.
Yeah, he says, I have a hoop in my driveway. I play all the time. But Michael doesn't want that. And there's this fantastic shot as they're preparing to go to the game where Oscar crumbles up a piece of paper and tosses it in the trash can easily. And Kevin takes out the last tissue in a box and then tosses the box across to the trash can easily.
With like a spin.
Yeah, it's real smooth. And then we cut to Stanley, who is, of course, going to be on the starting lineup. And he completely misses, and he doesn't even care, for one, but he just tosses a piece of paper over his shoulder and it lands short of the trash can. So an example of how Michael has these stereotypes in his head and is ignorant of those who express genuine interest and might have actual talent.
Well, on to some funny moments before the basketball game. I know there wasn't too long in the episode before the actual game starts, but I know I mentioned the hand strikes and gives a flower, which they talk about in the commentary, isn't an actual phrase, but it sounds sort of, like a Chinese proverb or something. But Michael sure made up that phrase, which is, I love it. It makes a lot of sense. So it's surprising to me that that's something Michael would say, but it's also not, because it's not real. So
Right. I think throughout the course of the show, there's lots of moments where Michael will say something that he think is prophetic or in some way inspirational. And a lot of times I think he makes them up in the spot, like in this instance. And a lot of times I think he's trying to quote something that is an actual quote, but then he just messes it up and turns it into something all his own.
and most of them are not as smooth as this one was.
No, this one actually does sound believably legitimate, which I really like.
Another funny one of mine for Michaels is when he is walking down to the warehouse right before the game, and he explains to the camera, or maybe it's to Ryan, that he's going to manage now, and he says, managing by walking around, as if that's how you're a good manager, is just by walking around your store.
Right, and then when he gets down to the warehouse, he's got this ridiculous outfit on, this all navy blue, like gym shorts and sleeveless shirt, and he's got a knee brace on, and he's got a Livestrong bracelet on.
It's all shiny.
Yeah, it's all shiny and brand new, because of course he wouldn't have well-worn gym clothes. And he does this ridiculous warm-up sequence where he does these knee highs for a few seconds and then does this like jumping back and forth loosey-goosey kind of thing. I don't really know what he's doing. I don't know what that accomplishes. And then he goes and he's dunking on this shortened hoop. Well, first he attempts to dunk a few times, and when he finally does make it in, Lonnie takes it and raises it up to proper height. And Michael just stands there like, well, that's unexpected. And he takes the ball and he just tosses it like almost violently at the net, and it just brushes the net and goes flying, clearly missing his goal.
And I think he thinks that the net is at the proper height the whole time. He's so confident, even though he's still missing. He's confident that he's close, but he's not even close.
Yeah, he's down there trying to impress those African Americans like he told us. Let's talk about the game, which starts off with Michael saying he's going to cover Roy. And when Jim interrupts and says, I thought I'd cover Roy, Michael says, no, I think Roy is actually their best player, insinuating that Michael should be the one covering the best player because he's the best player. And we find out very quickly that he is far from being the best player on this team.
And of course we know why Jim wants to cover Roy. It's because, it's all about Pam. It's, this testosterone competition between them, and it's the whole subtext of who's going to win the girl.
Right. And, for this game, I have all these, I have tons of things written down for Michael, and I clearly won't get to all of them. But there's all these things he does, like at the beginning, he's shouting all these random basketball terms. The biggest example to me is when he shouts 3 when he's clearly in the layup zone, like right up on the hoop, and it's not even close to being a 3-pointer, and then he misses. He does stuff like that. He shouts, who's on Roy? After Roy scores, and he said he was on Roy. So
right.
what's the deal, Michael? And then stuff like tossing the ball across the room and completely missing and shouting, come on, what is wrong with me today? Usually hit those.
I feel like he's just putting all the moves on to look impressive, but everyone knows he's not impressive. It's like if he was in some, montage of a movie with music playing in the background, he might look impressive, but he's in a basketball game and he's losing sorely.
It's funny, during the episode, I don't think we see him score at all.
I don't believe so.
And in the deleted scenes, we see him score twice, specifically. There's one time where he runs towards the hoop, and he actually manages a layup as he runs under it. And then there's a second time where he tries another one of those long-distance lobs across the field.
It was like a one-hand.
Yeah, he pulls it off. He completely by accident.
And the reaction was incredible.
It's
the whole
hilarious.
office screams, and he screams. It was great.
Yeah, he completely over-celebrates even for something like that, but that's just Michael. And it's a funny moment knowing that these were just improvised sort of pickup games, and they kept the best moments for the episode and for the deleted scenes.
There were a bunch of great deleted scenes, though, but we'll get to that.
What other standouts from the basketball game?
Beyond Michael's horrible playing, Michael's horrible behavior during the basketball game, when one of the warehouse guys accidentally elbows Michael a little bit, he is such a sore loser and screams flagrant personal foul, and he gets accidentally bumped. It's a game, it happens. And he decides that whoever was winning at that time are going to end the game, and they're the ones that won. When he just asked Angela who was winning, and then conveniently decides that, it's time to end the game. It's just horrible, bad sportsmanlike behavior, and just, so cringy.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny, he stages this sort of foul with someone who appears to be sort of the grandpa of the warehouse. He's an older man, very kind, very apologetic, but Michael just blows it way out of proportion, as he's wont to do. And what's even funnier is after they've returned to the office, there was no visible blood or actual injury down in the warehouse when he first got bumped, but back up in the office, he's stuffed these tissues up his nostrils. And they're completely clean tissues because, of course, he wasn't bleeding at all. It wasn't that bad an injury. It's not like Jim, who actually split his lip when Roy elbowed him.
And that wasn't even a moment. That was real. John Krasinski actually had his lip split open during the filming, so they just used it.
Yeah, so it's funny that Michael is just the character to blow it so out of proportion that here he is stuffing tissues up his nose to sort of bolster a fake injury.
Right, just to get the attention.
What about how Stanley behaves when he... What's that Stanley reveal like to you when he finally gets the basketball and he has no clue what he's doing? He even has less of a clue, I think, than Michael. Because at least Michael is trying to pull things off, but Stanley, he just doesn't know what to do. He's got that hand flying behind him, flopping around like a fish, and he's looking down at the ground. It's so funny. Every time Stanley gets the ball in this episode, I laugh.
It's really funny. I mean, it just reminds me of, I always reference middle school, I feel like, in this podcast, but it's true. I mean, so much of this is just so juvenile. It feels like, a bunch of inexperienced school kids playing basketball, because Stanley doesn't play basketball, but he's African American, so surely he does. And it just made me laugh, because it's so bad.
And then other small moments for me, there's Dwight stealing the ball from Ryan to score. They're on the same team. Ryan just says it, on the same team, Dwight. Doesn't react otherwise.
Don't have to compete.
But every time Dwight makes a basket in this episode, he looks to Michael for approval. And it's so sad because there's a couple times when Dwight would score and Michael said, "I was open, Dwight." Again, the way Michael treats Dwight is depressing.
Let him have a win,
Yeah,
it's okay.
Let him have this. Later, when Jim starts playing aggressive with Roy, we get these cuts to Pam in between the plays to see her reaction. And then later up in the office, Pam compliments Jim. And Roy is in a better mood at this point, too, because, hey, they won and they're not having to work on Saturday. But Pam compliments Jim's playing and he smiles. And as Roy and Pam are walking out, he hears Pam saying something about getting Roy into a bathtub. And then it's this brilliant small piece of micro acting from John Krasinski as his smile just slowly turns to this frown, basically. But it's a small bit by bit kind of change. It's not immediate. It's like he's smiling. He's happy that Pam complimented him. His face starts to fall as he hears Pam mention the bath. And then by the time they're gone, it's almost like his head is down in his hands.
It's funny because I have that in my notes too, and I had it that Jim was almost a little smug because I believe it was Roy that first complimented him. He called him Larry Bird, he's a great player, and Pam was like, yeah, he's pretty good. And so, Jim's a little smug, I showed him I'm going to get the girl, and then you're right, as they're leaving, he just, oh, no, they're going to go home together. It's just, oh, poor Jim.
Yeah, it's like he deflates.
Right, he shrinks down in his chair.
And then just the last couple of things I wanted to mention. Phyllis, when we finally see her start playing in the game, she scores immediately because, hey, she used to play in high school or whatever. So she would have clearly been a more valuable asset than Stanley earlier in the game. And then Kevin, after all is said and done, everybody's cleared out. He just takes the ball and he starts shooting these free throws. And we see him in the episode land probably 4 to 5. In the commentary, they reveal that Brian Baumgartner, who plays Kevin, actually did probably 14 or 15 in a row, which is just insane. And again, Michael underestimating his employees who expressed genuine interest in playing the game.
And Brian is apparently a really talented sportsman all around. He plays tennis. They said he plays basketball. He plays something else. He's just a really sporty guy, so that's pretty fun.
I thought it'd be fun to start a sort of assistant to the regional manager tally, just to count how many times they make that joke. And I think if I've done it correctly, listeners, you can chime in if you check in I was wrong. But this episode, by the end, we've made that joke 5 times. There was twice in pilot, there was 1 in the Alliance, and then there were 2 here, I think.
Seems right, yeah.
I just figured, I think it'd be fun if we sort of kept track as long as they're still making the jokes to see how many times they make the joke. So we're up to 5.
Listeners, keep us accountable. Tell us if we're wrong.
Definitely. We'll do our best. Now, let's move on to deleted scenes real quick. Were there any deleted scenes, or we can talk commentary too? What stood out from those for you?
Well, there were so many good deleted scenes. One of my favorites was Dwight with the giant whiteboard. So what we see in the episode is, this probably 4x5 whiteboard that's been divided into all these boxes. But in the deleted scene, he divides it even further, and it's like this multicolor. I mean, there's like 3 different, maybe 4 different colors of tape, and it's just this extremely complex thing that only Dwight could come up with. That Jim just, wow, that is so complicated, or something along those lines, and just Dwight being over the top as usual. And then I had some favorite deleted scenes with Michael as well. So Todd Packer, when he calls Michael, and Michael makes a sensitive joke about a Jewish doctor, and then turns to the camera and clarifies that wasn't a joke, when it clearly was meant to be one. Just more of Michael's insensitivity. What about you?
I just wanted to mention that we get the first mention of Kevin's band that he's a part of, with a pretty significant change from what it's like in the rest of the series, because in this episode, Kevin mentions that it is a Steve Miller cover band, and we've committed ourselves to no spoiler, so I won't reveal what it changes to, but after season 1, it's no longer a Steve Miller cover band.
It's not that, yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting that we get our first reference to that within the episode here. Not within the episode, within the deleted scenes.
I think my absolute favorite, though, was with Michael when we got a bit of it in the episode that aired, but he was talking about how basketball is jazz, and he scats a little bit.
I wrote this down, too.
And then he goes, oh, if you know jazz, you'll know this guy. It's, He plays a big curly horn, and he just contemplates the name. He can't get it out. Oh, it's Kenny G. You'll probably only know that name if you know jazz, but I know jazz, so I know Kenny G. It's just
it's ridiculous because people who are in the know about jazz don't even consider Kenny G.
And it's not like he's some little name that no one knows. Like, it's Kenny G.
Yeah, he's pretty big selling as far as making money with his albums goes. There was one more that I wanted to mention from the deleted scenes, and that was this scene with Pam revealing that she may not be all that excited for the Saturday plans with Roy after all, because she says, I thought we were saving for a wedding, but Roy went out and bought 2 wave runners, and I don't even get to use one of them because he and his brother are off racing them. So it adds almost another dimension to the way Pam behaves during the game itself, and the way she cheers for Jim. Like, there's a small moment when Jim makes his first basket and she cheers. Mm-hmm. So it's another interesting glimpse into that Pam-Roy dynamic. We're getting a lot of that in these episodes.
Yeah, I had that one down as well. I thought that was interesting. Kind of exactly what you would think, though. Roy just does not seem to include Pam in a lot of his fun. She's there for, I don't know, convenience, maybe.
It's almost like convenience or ownership in a certain way, or just the title of being engaged. It's strange. I don't really know what Roy perceives he's getting from this relationship, but he and Pam definitely view it a lot differently.
Yes.
Now, to close off our discussion on basketball, I came up with our discussion topic this week, which should be pretty fun. I think we should tell the story of a time we claim to be good at something, only to make a fool of ourselves doing that thing. So what do you got for us, Katie?
All right. I will preface this by saying, if I have to do this and Chad has to do this, listeners have to do it too.
Oh, definitely. Send them in.
All right. I think the most recent one I could think of, not that there were a ton. I don't think I've done this too often, but there was a time in college that I was definitely not fluent, but I could have a conversation in German. I was pretty okay at German. I like to say if you threw me into Germany, I could find my way out. Like, I was okay. So moving to New York, I had on my professional resume that I spoke, okay German. I forget my phrasing. I ended up as a member services person at the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York City, which, if you don't know, is a just enormous tourist attraction with lots of foreigners and Germans. So I was called out by somebody, oh, you speak German, right? And You know, it's funny because if you don't use a language, it goes away, and that definitely did. So I should have taken that off my resume for sure.
Oh, no. You probably still speak more than I do. I could probably list some German lyrics from songs I've sung in the past.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I could maybe, like, I know Heart is Herz, but that's basically the extent of my German.
Ja, das ist richtig. Das ist richtig, yeah. What's yours?
I don't have one super recent, but this was freshman year of college. You know, both of us have had music. Well, you have a lot more musical theater experience than I do, but I have a little bit. In my freshman year at Tech, I auditioned for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, a production they were doing at a local Methodist church. And I made it, but I made it as a dancer. And I am not the most deft with my feet. I don't know how I convinced the director that I was going to be a good dancer, but here I was cast as a dancer in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And
I didn't know that.
yes, there is this one song that is called Meal Bamboo, and it is quite a dance number. And you have these bamboo staffs as part of your costume, and it's fast paced, and I was overweight at the time. And there was this one part at the very end where you had to do a tuck and roll. You had to tuck the bamboo staff like at your waist and do this forward somersault. And that was the dickens for me. And so it was just, if you see the video, I pull it off, but it's like crooked to the left and I cover this huge distance because I'm a big guy. I think that's probably the best example. It's the first example that came to my mind of me convincing somebody somehow that I'm a dancer and then just sort of looking the fool on the stage. But I had a lot of fun, so I guess that's okay.
That's pretty great. I had a lot of that. When I moved to New York, I thought I was, you know, not a dancer, but like I could dance. I can't dance. Not in New York.
Yeah, my experience before this was basically show choir choreography.
Yeah. Lots of hands.
Right. Grapevine left and right.
Exactly. Step touch. I think that probably wraps up basketball. I think we can move on to the last episode of season 1, Hot Girl. Hot Girl aired April 26th, 2005, directed by Amy Heckerling and written by Mindy Kaling. Want to tell us a little bit about the plot, Chad?
Sure. So this is another pretty basic episode. On this day in the office, a purse vendor named Katie, who is played by a mostly then unknown Amy Adams, shows up to sell some of her wares, and Michael is immediately smitten by this, quote, hot girl. He sets her up in the conference room and spends the rest of the day trying to woo her, particularly with coffee, while also trying to spurn the advances of anyone else who might appear to be interested, including both Toby and Dwight. At the end of the day, it's not Michael, but Jim who leaves with Katie. So let's talk about what happens in between all of that. What's a character moment that you have to start us off?
The first one I have is really how the office kind of teams up against Pam in favor of Katie. Like Kevin and Michael both have little jabs against Pam about how much hotter Katie is. Like Katie's 2.0 and Pam is the original. It's just, really mean stuff.
Actually, Michael calls her Pam 6.0, which that's even worse because, you know, you think 1.0 to 2.0, that's the basic progression, but he went from 1.0 to 6.0. So, I mean, she's way, way better, way, way hotter than Pam. And it's just so sad because you see how visibly hurt she is by that comment.
Absolutely. That's just beyond, I don't know, something about that comment. Maybe because I'm a woman. I don't know. Maybe because all women think that they're Pam in this show, but having Michael and Kevin say that just kind of tugs at my heart. Like, that's just horrible.
Yeah, at least she has the wherewithal to stand up to Kevin and say, you know, Kevin, that's not very nice. That's pretty rude, actually. And he just sort of shrugs it off. But at least she does stand up for herself a little bit. Harder to do that against Michael when he's such a presence. Now, I mentioned in the summary that Michael really latches on to the idea of coffee to woo Katie in this episode. And it's because she mentions it once. She says a cup of coffee would be nice. And then he goes into this rant about Starbucks that doesn't make any sense and how he's this man who gets things done and is tearing down barriers. And it, again, makes no sense, but it's Michael. And the whole rest of this episode, he gets her a cup of coffee. Then he goes and he buys this $1,000 coffee machine in the guise of it being the sales incentive for those who sell the most paper. I was so worried watching this episode, obviously not this time, but probably the first time and previous times, that he was actually going to give her this espresso
Oh,
machine, because it would
I
totally be
know.
something Michael would do in order to win over the affections of a woman.
That would not work. Like, imagine meeting somebody that you are not attracted to at all, you're not interested in, and they are acting this way towards you. And what if he had given her $1,000 espresso machine? Like, wow, back off.
Yeah, and imagine Jan's reaction if he had done that.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
But there's this other moment where Dwight actually goes to Michael to ask permission to ask out Katie, which is so sad because Dwight is so delusional in his, quote, inferiority to Michael that he feels a need to ask permission in the first place. But Michael, he asked Michael, are you in love with her? And Michael says, I don't know, too early to tell. And it's like, of course you're not in love with her, Michael. You're just thinking
No,
with your private
she's
area.
cute. She's cute. It's okay. That's not love.
Right. Not at all.
There's, I have a couple actually, I guess, for Jim, Pam, Roy, that whole triangle. Roy calls Jim Jimmy, which was just a little one, but for me that was such a stab at him. Like, it's the little moments between Jim and Roy that just, they're competing in such a small scale, trying to not be obvious. And then I had another one for, when Jim tells Pam that he's thinking about asking out Katie, Pam gets really weird. Which I think is kind of the first time we've seen Pam show, like, jealous feelings. Like, maybe Jim shouldn't be going out with Katie. Maybe Jim, maybe she has feelings for Jim. I don't know. That might be the first time I saw something like that.
He tells her that he's going to be seeing Katie this weekend, and then the conversation they were having just completely flatlines immediately. And shortly thereafter, we actually see Pam putting on lip gloss.
Yes.
Like she's almost trying to compensate for the way everybody else is viewing her versus viewing Katie.
She's definitely feeling pretty self-conscious at this point.
Yeah, and I mentioned that moment in the basketball episode where Michael introduces Roy as a guy who dates Pam. And we have another instance of that in this episode. And in both instances, Roy doesn't correct the person who says he's dating. So they're sitting in the I'm trying to actually remember how it arises. They're sitting in the break room. They're eating lunch. Oh, and Roy says, I'd be all over that if I wasn't dating Pam.
That's right.
And first, he's engaged, as Pam very pointedly reminds him. And second, that would be awful to say even if they were just dating.
Right.
And it's worth noting that episodes 3 through 6 of season 1 are actually out of order. In fact, that's pretty common for these first 3 seasons, or maybe even 4 seasons, as I was looking earlier. If you look at the production codes, 1 and 2 are in the correct order, but then this was actually supposed to be episode 3, so it takes place before basketball, and then basketball wasn't until episode 5. So it's weird orders, but with that in mind, this taking place before basketball. So this is one time when Roy is caught by Pam saying that he's dating her. And then later, in a later episode, when somebody says dating Pam, he still doesn't correct him. So it's just an example of Roy not caring. He doesn't care. He's not learning from this. And it's sad. It really is.
It's infuriating. I mean, ugh.
And he doesn't even apologize for what he said about how he would be all over Katie if he wasn't dating Pam. When he goes up, he comes back up to the office later, and Pam is sitting on Jim's desk having a conversation, and he starts tickling Pam. And he says, come on, Pammy, are you still mad at me? You still mad at me? I didn't mean it, Pam. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it. And there's not an apology in there anywhere. He's just making her laugh, and that's his way of making her forgive him.
And Pam doesn't ask for an apology. She doesn't make him really think twice about it. I mean, she corrects him, but that doesn't affect him. So I feel like Pam's sort of conditioned to just be treated this way. She's okay with it, or not okay with it, but she's used to it.
Yeah, especially after 3 years.
Right. She knows, all right, Roy can be a jerk. That's Roy. When that sucks. That's not how it's supposed to go, You don't have to marry that guy.
There's this talking head Pam has before the conversation with Jim where he mentions the date with Katie. And she says, yeah, Jim's like a brother to me, and he's my best friend in the office, and I hope he finds someone. So it's like she's realizing, I think, that Jim has a crush on her in some capacity, even though she doesn't really consider it seriously. And then again, that conversation with Jim where it just flatlines once he mentions the date with Katie. Like she's lost interest or is almost has her feelings hurt because Jim is trying to move on a little bit. Any other character moments?
I guess just this last one where Dwight does finally ask out Katie. And I wrote down the dialogue here. So Dwight says, "Can I talk to you for a second in private?" Katie, "I don't think so. I'm really busy." Dwight, "It'll just take a second." Katie, "I can't. Just for a minute, please. I really can't. I wanted to talk to you in private because I wanted to ask you out on a date." No. Is that no to talking to me in private, or is that no to the date? Both. And Dwight is just so... He can't take no for an answer. Like, she said no. She said she's busy. She said she can't. I really can't. No. And he does it anyway. Like, dude, come on.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to race against Michael to a certain extent.
Yes, exactly.
But also, he just doesn't know how to approach the situation. When he first walks in before that conversation, he says something to the effect of, "How are you doing?" "Good." So anyways, like, he doesn't wait for her answer. He just gets the pleasantries out of the way and then gets right down to what he came in to talk about.
He knows he's supposed to be nice, so he's nice, and then let's get to what I'm talking. Yeah, it's... Ooh, I can't imagine the last time he asked a girl out. It just... He's so bad at it.
Yeah, it's such a foreign concept to him, pretty obviously. Now, moving on to funny moments. It's awful. This is very awful, but I think everybody somewhat loves the Michael Toby hate.
Yes.
And this scene is just the worst because Michael is walking around Katie, introducing her to the rest of the office, and they get back to the annex where Toby is. And Toby realizes, hey, you have on a ring from my alma mater. So they strike up a conversation. And Michael just violently cuts into the conversation with, "Oh, you're divorced though, aren't you? Man, what a painful divorce. You slept in your car. Are you still on antidepressants?"
And he has kids.
Yeah, and he has kids. Wow. It's, again, it's awful. But because it's Michael Toby, I always, those scenes always make me laugh.
And it was just because Katie took an interest in another guy. That's all it was. And it was a guy that he hated. It's just, if Katie was going to fall for a guy in the office, you know, Michael might be okay with it being Jim. You know, he loves Jim, or maybe Ryan, but not Toby.
Yeah, and he finishes off that conversation with looking at the picture of Toby's daughter on his desk and goes, "Oh, she's a cutie pie." And just walking away, like, to soften the blow in his mind, I guess.
Right.
And then he just walks off, and Toby's just sitting there, sort of wallowing in this misery that Michael has thrust him into.
God forbid Toby have a nice conversation with a woman, you know.
Yeah. And then right after that, Michael has his talking head where he says, "I live by one rule, no office romances. But I live by another rule. Just do it. Nike."
Right.
So, one rule? No. I also have another one. And in case you didn't know this very, very, very famous slogan, it's Nike.
Nike, right. And Katie isn't exactly an office worker. She's there for one day. Like, I know, I think it was Dwight asked permission because office romances are taboo, but she's not an office worker. Michael using that as a reason was just so skeevy to me. Like, no, you're just, I don't know. Oh, I have an addition to the Michael and Katie fictional love story. Michael is already asking Pam for her opinions on futons. What do women think about futons? Presumably because Katie is going to be spending a lot of time at his house. I think that's already where his mind is. You know, what do women think of futons? Like, you know, you weren't thinking this 3 hours ago before she got to the office. This is all about your future with this woman.
And then when he brings Katie an espresso later, after he's taken the machine out of the box, he takes a sip of his own espresso, and he so obviously dislikes it. Like, he takes a sip and he cringes. So he's just putting on a front for this woman that he is suddenly very, very interested in.
Right.
Another part of his preparations for Katie coming over, or Katie getting a ride home from him, is going out to his car with Ryan to clean out all the filet of fish boxes and wrappers from his car. And then there's this particular moment that always makes me laugh when Ryan says, or he finds a sports drink and he says, "Do you want me to throw this out?" "What flavor is it?" "Blue." "Blue's not a flavor." It says flavor Blue Blast. "Oh, Blue Blast. Then put it in the trunk."
As if he couldn't have gotten that from Blue, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's blue. Come on, Michael.
Like, everyone knows what that tastes like.
Yeah, and there's this extended scene in that moment where Michael then asks Ryan for music to listen to on the way home. And Ryan asks Michael, okay, what kind of music do you like? Oh, I like all of it. How about hip hop or indie rock? Yeah, I like both of those. And then Ryan starts listing off these bands that fit in those categories. And Michael says, yes, I like that one. Oh, I like the last thing they put out. And Ryan realizes very quickly that Michael has no idea what he's talking about. And so he starts making up these fake band names, including one called The Glorps.
That should be pretty obvious.
Michael, again, points out how much he likes their work and their music. And Ryan just shares this knowing glance with the camera. Ryan, at this point, I have different feelings on Ryan later, but at this point, it's really funny watching him interact with Michael because he always has the straightest of faces. Like he's trying very hard not to react or to react in any way to what Michael is saying or doing or getting him to do. It's like he's trying to remain very neutral in his interactions with Michael.
And I wonder why that is. And I'm betting it's just that he's a temp. I mean, I've been a temp, and it was all sort of day stuff, not, for 6 months or however long his contract is with them. But you kind of dissociate yourself from that whole situation because it's not your office. It's not your place. So I feel like that's kind of what he's doing is like, oh, none of this really matters. This isn't my job, so I don't have to take it really seriously. So he just messes with Michael, and it's so funny.
It is. I really like the scene where Jim tricks Dwight into talking to Katie, basically for his own amusement, and he shares it with Pam. So he convinces Dwight that he needs to buy a purse as a way to sort of woo Katie. And so he sends Dwight off, and he goes over behind Pam's desk, and they do this like fake conversation interaction between the two of them. And Jim goes up into this falsetto, and the line that makes me laugh the most is when he says, "Oh, I'll be the prettiest girl at the ball."
That's a pretty good Jim for Dwight. That was
Thank you. That's the one that makes me laugh the hardest. And then Pam correctly points out that it's sad. It's just so sad.
It is. Like, he should know better. I mean, these are all pretty girly purses, and he's so convinced that if I buy a mini briefcase, it's gonna win the girl, and it's just, he's so naive sometimes. I think one of my favorite moments of the whole episode, and it's such a small thing, but like I've said, it's the small things that get me in this show, are when Katie's leaving the office with Jim. Michael thinks he's going home with her, but she's going home with Jim. She says to the whole office, "Oh, bye. It was nice meeting some of you." Like,
that was one I wrote down as well.
It was just such a well-phrased line. Like, some of you. Maybe just Jim, Pam, Toby. That might have been it.
And then Michael, he didn't know until that moment that Katie wasn't going to go into his car. And in his final talking head, he sort of lessens the blow to himself by saying, "Do I have a special someone? My employees are my special someones," and that he'd choose them over a one-night stand. And it's very clear in that moment that I think all of Michael's knowledge on what a one-night stand might entail comes from what he's seen on TV, as most of his things do.
It's a little sour grapes moment. I didn't want it anyway. I have my employees. It's just, he's lying. I think he would rather spend the night with the woman.
I think so too. And this episode does bring our assistant to the regional manager tally to 6. And what's special about it in this episode is Dwight actually makes a correction himself because he is trying to go after Katie, and he's seen that Michael is also going after Katie. And so, again, he's thinking himself inferior to Michael, and he makes a correction to Jim himself, assistant to the regional manager.
That one slipped by me. I'll have to watch for that one next time.
Yeah. Now, what about deleted scenes? There's not a commentary for this episode, but what deleted scenes stood out to you?
I think one of my favorites is when Dwight is talking to Katie and trying to ask her out, and he is just shoveling himself into a huge hole. He's doing so badly, and he ends up with his shirt nearly off somehow. He's trying to show Katie his snakeskin belt because the purse that he's about to buy is faux snakeskin. And he wants to know if it's waterproof. He goes, "Well, snakes are waterproof, so that's probably waterproof. I have a snakeskin belt. Do you want to see?" And he lifts up his shirt way higher than you would need to lift up your shirt to show someone your belt. I mean, it's pretty much off his head. It's just so unnecessary.
Yeah, and she's very uncomfortable. Yeah. In fact, I think setting out to film this episode, Steve Carell probably thought to himself, "Now what can I do to make Amy Adams appear as uncomfortable as possible?" And she does a really good job of looking super uncomfortable many times in this episode, including in that moment with Dwight.
She really does.
Now, after Dwight has bought the purse from Katie and he's walked out and he's got it on his shoulder, Jim convinces him, this is in a deleted scene, Jim convinces him to put some of his desk stuff into the mini briefcase, as he calls it, just so he can have this payoff later where in the break room, Dwight is looking through the refrigerator or something, and Jim goes in and says, "Hey, can I borrow your stapler?" And Dwight responds, "Yes, it's in my purse." And Jim walks off with a grin, and everybody else in there, I think it's Angela and Stanley and maybe Kevin.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Kevin or Stanley, I don't remember for sure. But yeah, they all just sort of stare at Dwight as he continues nonchalantly looking through the refrigerator.
Because he doesn't realize what he just said. And I think I made a note about the first part of that scene you were talking about where Jim convinces Dwight to fill his purse with office supplies, and Dwight puts it on as he's at his desk, and he leaves the, like, protective plastic that's on the handles that comes with purses sometimes, and it's just the loudest, crunchiest plastic. And for whatever reason, that sound just killed me, because with every little movement he made, it was just...
like drawing attention to him.
Yeah, it was, and he kept looking over at Katie, and oh, that killed me. I wish they had left that in.
Yeah, there's this weird payoff with Dwight's purse at the end of the deleted scenes where he goes and he gives the purse to Kelly, which I wonder, I mentioned that these were aired sort of out of order. This comes immediately after Diversity Day. Diversity Day is episode 2, and this is technically episode 3 as far as production codes go. So I wonder if they're following through on that quote from Dwight in the Diversity Day training, where he says that he's attracted to both white people and Indians.
Well, I believe one of the commentaries, I could not tell you which one, possibly Diversity Day, that Dwight and Kelly were originally supposed to have a little thing, or at least they were flirting or something, which was super subtle, and I think they cut out a lot of that. But I think that was one of the leftover bits, was that he ended up gifting his purse to Kelly.
Interesting. I didn't catch that, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'll have to find out which one that was. But if you go back and watch, there are a couple of tiny scenes where they have a moment between the two of them, and that quickly dissolves.
Right. One more thing from the deleted scenes I wanted to point out, and you can see some of this in the main episode as well, but there's a board in the conference room with the sales team's names on it. And it looks like sort of projected goals and then what they've actually sold up to a certain amount of time or something like that. And so we actually get some names of salespeople in the office aside from our main 4, which are Jim, Dwight, Stanley, and Phyllis. And the other 3 mentioned are Andy, Roger, and Michelle. So worth noting that there is an Andy before Andy Bernard shows up towards, end of season 2, beginning of season 3 sometime?
Yeah, I totally missed that. Huh.
It's just a small thing. I actually paused it for a few seconds so I could read it properly.
It seems like the writers had something in mind for the name Andy.
Yeah, it was just something that appeared in the background real quick, and I thought it'd be interesting to look at it a little bit closer.
Yeah, that is interesting. Well, I guess that brings us to our discussion section for Hot Girl. I struggle with this one, but I think what I want to talk about is, why do you think Jim goes out with Katie? Why do you think he asks her out? We've seen him pine over Pam for 6 episodes now, even in this one, and he chooses Katie. They don't have that much in common. She hasn't shown that she's particularly funny in this episode. We don't know a lot about her. Is she a distraction, or is she an actual interest? What do you think?
I think she definitely probably falls more into the distraction category. Jim has been struggling, especially in this episode. There was that moment where Pam was sitting on his desk and Roy comes up and starts tickling her while Jim is right there. And his response is just to walk off. He's like, I'm not going to deal with this right now. I like this girl and she is not having a good time with this. And he actually has a talking head where he says something to the effect of, I'm a good friend to Pam and she can always come to me when she's having problems with her work or with her fiance. And yeah, those are her only 2 problems. So I think it's definitely more of a distraction to get away from Pam just a little bit. And it's interesting because when he goes in there and he finally starts talking to her, he's so natural at it. So I don't know what that says about him and Pam. I don't know if it just shows how strong his connection is to Pam and how he would withhold these flirting talents he seems to have because he likes this girl so much. Or I don't know. But I do think she's more of a distraction, at least at this point.
I tend to agree with you. I think he's just been so in love with Pam for so long. I mean, presumably way before we met them in episode 1. I mean, they made it seem like he was in love with her from day one. I mean, whenever she started, I guess. And that's been so long, and he's been so hurt. I think he probably just needed a fun night with somebody that he didn't love, you know? Just go have a drink, go talk to somebody that doesn't break his heart every day.
Yeah, somebody who's going to express interest back at him, somebody who's going to reciprocate.
Right. It's kind of a sad plot moment for me. I don't know why. I'm just so team Jim and Pam.
Yeah, and it is interesting that he would choose the episode. It takes place in this episode and with a girl who everybody is comparing Pam against.
Right. I mean, they definitely have similarities, and I think he catches on to that too.
It just makes me... I don't think he does it on purpose, but I can understand why Pam's feelings would be a little bit hurt beyond just having a sort of attraction to Jim in general. But the fact that he would ask out this girl who everybody else has been comparing her to negatively the rest of the day, you know?
Right.
Anyways, I think that wraps up our discussion on Hot Girl, and it ends the official 3rd episode of An American Workplace.
And season 1 of The Office.
Yeah, nice, quick and easy. We wanted to do this because it was so quick and easy. So at this point, you've listened to hopefully 3 episodes of us talking about The Office, and now it's your turn to join in. So call to action. If you're liking the show, let us know. Reach out on social media or email, which we're about to give to you, and share your thoughts on season 1 especially. Share your thoughts on the show and the format and any suggestions or ideas or things you like, any of that.
If you want to hear us talk about something that we're not talking about, let us know. We'll talk about it. It's a lot of this is up to you guys. We want to hear what you have to say.
Yes, and a lot of the way this podcast grows is going to depend on how you interact with us and the feedback you give us so that we can make a show that's really tailored toward Office fans in general. So let us know, and we will definitely start including your thoughts on future episodes, since at this point on, we'll be releasing 1 episode a week, and we'll be recording them each week so that we can make sure to respond to your feedback. So the places where you can find us: facebook.com/workplacepod and @workplacepod on Twitter. And please, if you're liking the show, you've heard us 3 times at this point, go to iTunes, rate and review, and even subscribe. That's a big help to us and might help us get some much needed attention to help us grow here in the beginning times. And if you have feedback or ideas, you can email us also at workplacepod@gmail.com.
You can find me on Twitter at KTLady623 or at facebook.com/katie.white.
And the best place to find me is at Chadadada on Twitter. That is CHADADADA, and on facebook.com/chad.hopkins. And you can also find my other podcast, Cinescope, where we talk about the movies we love and why we love them, at thecinescopepodcast.com and wherever podcasts can be found. And all of our show notes and all of our contact information for this show can be found at workplacepodcast.com. And that is all for this week. Thank you for joining us to watch one of our favorite shows, The Office, here on episode 3 of An American Workplace. Make sure to join us in episode 4 for our discussion on the first 2 episodes of season 2, The Dundies and Sexual Harassment. Thanks. Talk to you later.
See you next time.